Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Stephen Bulldrek, and welcome once again to my video log. This week, I am talking anime once again. Since last week, I discussed the current anime season, and chances are really good I'll end up doing more anime-focused video logs and such in the future. I decided to do one real quick this week to discuss what anime is and some of the terms and stuff that will pop up when you're talking about anime for those that are not familiar with the genre. Because while many geeks and many of my friends are well aware of what anime is and such, many are not. So I figured I'd do a little something to kind of update them and educate a little bit. Alright, and I'm even a little bit organized this week. Still not very good at the whole talking thing, go figure. But I actually have some screenshots and some images and stuff to go with what I'm talking about this week, and have a rough outline worked out of what I'm going to talk about. So, hey, go me for a little bit of organization. Picture on the screen here is from 2007. WotC at Gen Con, Wizards of the Coast had a giant, had some giant miniatures and some giant dice set up at Gen Con, and I got this picture of me hugging a giant D20, and apparently this picture has gone slightly semi-viral, as I found out. George Takei used it a few years back for one of his daily, or at least his people, for his daily Facebook funny thingy, like funny memes, funny pages, funny stuff that he posts. And it was on there, and as my buddy Kane has pointed out, there are numerous other websites that apparently have used this image for various purposes. So, some good, some not so good, because, big fat guy hugging a giant die. Go figure. But either way, I figured I'd use it as my opener this week, since Andy just brought it back to our attention this week, and a friend of mine suggested that I leverage the image a little bit. So I figured, what the hell. Alright, so the first question is, what is anime? And the simple answer to that is anime is Japanese cartoons, which will enrage some fans if you call it cartoons. But the simple fact of the matter is the word anime literally means cartoon or animated show. In fact, anime is specifically a French word that means directly cartoon. So anime is basically anything animated in Japan, and from Japan, generally speaking. You'll get some people that can argue there's a specific style to it, which is sometimes true, but anime runs such a huge gauntlet from cutesy little kiddie cartoon. You can kind of see down at the bottom here, this little girl with the hat that says Arale. You get these very little chibi cutesy things, characters, and like little cute mascot characters like the Pokemon and such, that would feel right at home in many American cartoons. But then you get some of the more stylized stuff, like you see in the background, a lot of the characters and stuff. And there is a specific, there is certain traits that are common in many anime. You get the larger eyes, certain hairstyles, certain features and such. But there isn't really one specific anime style. And on top of that, the anime styles have evolved greatly over time. It gets really obvious if you pick out an anime from like the 70s, something like go back and grab something like the old Go Lion / Voltron anime, and then you go into the 80s, get something along the lines of like Fist of the North Star, then you hit 90s, and then 2000s, and then stuff from recent years, and you can really see the way the style evolves over time. So it's interesting, and there's a lot to it. It's one of those. It's an eternal argument among subsets of fans as to what is anime and such. But my personal take on it, the way I use the term, is Japanese cartoons, Japanese animation. And anime is interesting because anime serves largely two purposes in Japan. Over here, cartoons are done to sell toys, but cartoons also have to rate an audience, usually of a certain level, to stay viable. But in Japan, many, many times the animation is nothing more than a vehicle to drive sales of other things. A lot of anime are posted late at night and such. They don't really care too much about general viewership so much as they care about disc sales and, more importantly, peripheral sales. Character goods, which are like keychains, posters, T-shirts, anything with the character's image on it, toys of the show, whatever. And as well, a lot of anime is based on existing works from either manga, which is Japanese comic books, which I'll cover a little bit later, and light novels, which are kind of young adult novels in Japan. And the job is that they'll get an anime based on the manga or the light novel, and the job of the anime in that case is to sell copies of the light novel or the manga. So, it's a little different than over here. Not terribly so, because like I said, a lot of times the cartoons over here are designed to sell toys, but they're also designed for ratings for the network, because it's all commercial based. So, a little bit different there. As for me, I'm not an expert on anime, so I'm going to get that one kind of up front. I'm a little late on that. I should have said this a little earlier. By any means, I'm not an expert. I'm not really, really heavily versed on anime. I'm not going to be able to tell you too many. I'm not going to be able to tell you any voice actors or directors or any of that such, really. I don't pay that much attention to that. I just watch the shows and enjoy them for what they are. And my history with anime is really on and off over the years, and it stretches all the way back to 1991 or so. When I was in high school, we had a foreign exchange student from Japan named Yuki, who was staying with a lady that my mom worked with. So I hung out with her on occasion, and I got to know her at school and everything. She was really, really cool. And she is the first one to introduce me to anime because she brought with her a couple of subtitled VHS tapes. And there weren't a lot of those back then. There were some, but there wasn't too many that were officially subtitled or dubbed even. But these two were two of the freakier ones, because it was Akira and Fist of the North Star. Classics, everybody should watch them, but they are definitely more violent. They were a couple of the first ones to really break big over here as anime rather than something that was ported and translated and redone. I mentioned earlier Voltron. You also had things like Robotech and Speed Racer. And these were anime, but they were... Battle of the Planets is another really good one. These were anime, but they were basically completely stripped down and redone for the American audience, to the point where things were edited out, the storylines were completely changed. They would mash up multiple different episodes and just make up their own stories. They had very little relation sometimes to the original shows, other than some real basic concepts. So Akira and Fist of the North Star were a couple of the first ones that came over that A, came over straight, and B, came over and kept intact the violence and all of that stuff that was not something that Americans were used to seeing in anime. And, so I'm watching these, and there's bloodshed, and there's people dying, and I'm like, what the heck? And they're just crazy. I mean, Akira's got psychics and people blowing up, and Fist of the North Star, guy pokes the dude and gives him the finger of death, and the guy explodes a minute later, and, I mean, it's crazy, and it's just really really out there. And I remember after watching, I think it was Akira, I just kind of looked at Yuki and I said, what the hell is wrong with you people? This is what you guys watched? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? And she goes, and it was the funniest thing, because she just completely looks at me, gets very serious, and just deadpans, you fuckers nuked us. And I sat there in stunned silence for about 30 seconds, and then she just busts up laughing. Because she thought that was just the funniest thing to say to me. And, she was being sarcastic and all that. And it's just, but it was just a really funny. So that's always been my explanation for why Japan tends to be a little on the weird side, is that we nuked them. And they ain't been right since. I didn't really have a whole lot of exposure to anime after that until about 1997, 1998 or so. I started working at Suncoast Motion Picture Company. Oops. I completely forgot. I had pictures. I was going to do a slideshow. You're sitting here watching one lame image, and I've got this whole thing. I had Akira. We got Fist of the North Star, the most violent and action-packed animated film of all time. So anyways, about 1997 or so, I started working at the local mall at Suncoast Motion Picture Company. And I was, for most of my tenure there, I worked there for about 5 years. And for most of my tenure there, I was about the only one that knew anything about anime. I didn't know a ton, but knowing anything meant that I knew more than the average, more than any of the other employees, and more than half of most of our customers. So I was kind of the go-to guy for that. And while I was there, I did pick up and watch some anime. And I had a buddy, Robbie, who I was gaming with at the time, who was pretty heavily into anime and other things. And so I would borrow stuff from him or watch stuff over at his place sometimes. So I watched some anime through there, but not a ton. And then around 2001, I moved down to Cincinnati. And while I was there, my roommate Toon and my buddy Sludig, they would go up sometimes to a local anime club at Cincinnati University. So I went up with them sometimes, and I would watch stuff there. And then over the next few years, I had a buddy down in Columbus, Matt, and another buddy up in Michigan, Kender, who hooked me up with some fan sub anime. And back then, anime was somewhat hard to get, especially if it was not something really big. Only a fraction of the stuff that was being produced would make it over to the United States. And it generally was something that the companies thought would sell fairly well. So there was a lot of stuff that at the time never came over in any sort of legal form. Plus, there was this really big scene for what they called fan subbing, which was fan subtitling. So the fans would record episodes off of Japanese TV, and they would translate and put in the subtitles themselves. And then there was a whole underground distribution network for that. Many, many times these were done shortly after the episodes would air, so long before they would ever be over here in any legal form anyways. So these would circulate the internet. And, and this was back in the day of, Kazaa and Napster and all those file sharing programs being really big. And the And of course, and then many times the groups would, have little disclaimers on there saying, "Hey, this is for distribution. If this gets a legal version, please go buy the real version." And of course, a lot of people didn't because, filthy pirates and all that. But at the time, it was one of the only ways to get anime on a regular basis. Plus, anime was really bloody expensive. When I was working at Suncoast, obviously back to 97, 98, 99, almost everything was all still VHS. There was, DVD really wasn't a thing yet, and or was just starting to become a thing. But the VHS tapes would be very frequently you would get a single 22-minute episode, on a VHS tape, and they would charge $20 to $30 for that tape. And even when they when they started releasing them on DVD, it was better, but you would still only get a few episodes on it. You'd get 3 episodes, maybe 4 episodes on a DVD, sometimes only 2, and they would charge you $30, $40 for the DVD. So, and if you wanted an entire box set that had the entire season on it, you were sometimes talking, $100, $150 minimum. So, anime was really expensive, so the fan sub scene really was strong at the time. And so I had a couple of buddies who were a little into that sort of thing, so they would occasionally burn me copies of stuff and send them to me, or when I was up visiting, I would pick up discs of them. And so that was one way I was able to watch some anime. But the last time I did that was about 2005, 2004, somewhere in there. And after that, I didn't really watch much in the way of anime until a couple of years ago. At the beginning of end of 2013, beginning of 2014, was when my depression problems that I've been fighting really, really came to the front. And I hit a point where I didn't want to do anything, didn't want to talk to anybody, couldn't do anything. So I would basically just sit around and watch TV all the time. And for whatever reason, I decided to start watching anime again. Being a little careful of what I watched, because there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of more violent, more darker anime. So I avoided that stuff and watched more comedies, romances, stuff like that. And I've been basically going full throttle since 2014, watching just a ton of stuff. So that's my history with anime. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the anime terms and anime genres and stuff that I may talk about or use in the future while I'm doing these videos, just so that you guys kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. So the first one, that was my anime club video. I keep forgetting to follow this. Sorry, I'm not following my script very well. Here we go. First one, and this one's I kind of talked about I talked about in my last video some, that's the term core, C-O-U-R. Anime is broken down into seasons. There's 4 seasons a year, winter, spring, summer, fall. Each of these is 3 months long. And that span of 3 months, a show will have usually between 10 and 13 episodes. And that's called a core, or a season. Shows that are longer, you'll have some shows that run 22 to 26 episodes. Those will be referred to as a 2-core season. And on occasion, you'll even get some shows that are 3-core or whatever. There's also some shows that are just simply ongoing. Stuff like Fairy Tail, the old Dragon Ball, One Piece. Shows like that just basically just are eternal for the most part. They don't really break down so much into the straight seasons as much. But most shows follow the 13 episode or 10 episode, whatever, 12 episode format, and they fall neatly into the seasons. So, fan service. We're going to start off with some of the fun stuff. Fan service refers to sexy times. That's the best way to put it. Basically, it's things that are put in to entice the audience in some way. Frequently, these you'll either have shows that have occasional panty shots, stuff like that, because all the girls wear the short school skirts, or they'll have the beach scenes, beach episode. You'll have a hot springs episode, something along those lines. Sometimes, but not always, there's nudity, but not a lot of times there's not any outright nudity. It'll either be censored or there'll be convenient steam, light rays, whatever. Occasionally, with the Blu-rays, they'll remove those, so you'll actually have actual nudity, and that's, I think, done largely as a way to sell the Blu-rays to a certain subsection of fan. But generally speaking, the fan service is relatively harmless. It's there to, like I said, it's there for sexy fun times for the audience. You'll also frequently get what sometimes is called as man service, which is male fan service. So you'll get the guys, muscly guys all shirtless, or something along those lines. Besides that, there is also two other levels to that. There's ecchi, and which is ecchi tends to take fan service to the next level, where there is outright nudity. There'll be characters making out. Basically, that's when it takes it to more of a hard R rating. There's nothing usually too outright terrible, but you get a lot more nudity, a lot more sexual content. Sometimes, but nothing too awful. And then you've got hentai, and hentai is outright porn. Frequently, it'll get referred to as, tentacle porn or something along those lines, and not all hentai is like that. Some hentai is just more straight vanilla. Some hentai is the weird tentacle demon porn. There's all kinds of different stuff. I'm not that familiar with the genre, thank God, because it's weird. But and I don't have images for either of those, so I figured that would be safer for YouTube. So we'll just avoid those. But those are two others. I usually won't, anything I talk about usually probably won't be ecchi or hentai, because I don't really watch those too often. And those aren't shows that usually get simulcast anyways. So, simulcasting, I should say, it's something that's relatively new over the last few years, and basically there'll be streaming services, Crunchyroll, Funimation, the Anime Network. There's a few places that do it, and what it is they license a show. It'll air in Japan, and then a day or two later they'll have a subtitled version that they will stream on their website. So there's no more of the long delays between when a show airs in Japan and when it's available for a U.S. audience. It's really nice. Almost all shows that are airing anymore get simulcast, which is really, really nice, through one of the channels. Funimation and Crunchyroll tend to split things up pretty evenly between the two. Licensing-wise, there's not usually a whole lot of crossover because they all want exclusives, because they're fighting for subscriptions and all that. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about genres. First genre is harems. Harems are usually one guy, bunches of girls. Harem is a term that gets a little overused. Usually, a true harem is one character with a bunch of girls who are interested in the character romantically. So the girls are either all fighting for him, or they're just fighting for his attention. Or in a couple of instances, the main character or one of the other characters just decides, hey, let's just go for, me with everybody. Usually these shows are heavy fan service or ecchi shows. Some of them are really good, some of them are terrible. They're pretty common to have some variation of a harem. You also get a lot of shows that get referred to as harems. Shows like Sword Art Online, where there's a lot of a lot of female characters, and there's only one or maybe only one or two male characters. But the male character is only interested in one character. There's basically usually there's an actual romantic pairing and a single one. Like with Sword Art Online, you've got Kirito and Asuna. The two of them are a couple. There's the rest of the girls, and while the rest of the girls might like the main character, they might even, it's usually not a romantic thing. Or it's one of those things where if there wasn't the couple already going on, there might be a romantic thing, but since there's a couple, it's off limits. So it's not really a harem because it's not one guy with a bunch of girls glomming onto him. But because it's one dude and a bunch of girl cast members, people tend to refer to it as a harem, which is wrong, but that's another one of those fun internet arguments that gets made lots and lots. You also have shonen shows. Shonen refers to shows that are generally marketed at a audience of around 15 or under, male audience, boys. These tend to be fighting shows of some sort. As you can see on my screen, we've got Naruto, One Piece, Dragon Ball. I have no idea who the white dude on the bottom is from. I don't usually watch too many of these shows, although frequently these are the shows that are just really long and have tons and tons of episodes and stuff. Because again, they're marketed towards the younger crowd, so they can sell lots of toys and lots of merchandise to the kids. Granted, they're popular with older audiences too, but their general target audience is a little bit younger. Then you've got shoujo, which is the same thing but targeted at younger girls. And usually these are very romance-oriented. They also tend to have a little bit of a different art style. Not all of them, but there is a very distinct shoujo style, and you can see in this picture here, that kind of is very typical of the shoujo romance style. But shoujo stuff, like I said, it's almost always romance, and it's aimed at younger girls. There's also two other terms that occasionally get used, seinen and josei. Jose, I don't know. Again, I might mispronounce some of this stuff, so bear with me. Seinen is basically shonen, but aimed at 18 to 40-year-old men. Josei is aimed at the same as the female audience. Generally, they tend to be something similar to the romance or that, but they tend to be a little more mature, a little more adult-oriented. You don't see a ton of specifically seinen and josei anime. That's more of a... And the terms really blur anyways. They're one of those things where they're a convenient label, but they don't always apply. And they're really a holdover from some of the manga magazines and such. Another one is the magical girl / mahou shoujo genre. And if you've ever seen Sailor Moon, you're familiar with the magical girl genre. Basically, it's typical girl wish fulfillment. Frequently, these are aimed at girls. They're basically girl empowerment type shows where, the girl gets magic powers and she can save the world. On occasion, they get a little pervier and they're more aimed at dudes. But there's a lot of them. You get a lot of these types of shows kicking around. Let's see. Another term you'll see bandied about is bishonen. And bishonen generally refers to as very pretty guys. Bishonen are generally, the art style is common in the shoujo animes, and they're designed to appeal to women. Apparently Japanese women really like pretty men, for the most part. And I did fail to mention something when I was talking about the harems, and this is actually a great picture for it because this is what they refer to as a reverse harem. The character in the middle here with the brown hair is actually a girl. She tends to dress like a boy, and she doesn't really care about her appearance too much, so she doesn't look real feminine, and she gets drafted into, this is from an anime called Ouran Host Club, and she gets drafted into the club, and she basically pretends to be a guy. But this is what they call as a reverse harem because it's a girl with a bunch of dudes who are romantically attracted to her, one way or another. There aren't as many of those. There are not nearly as many of those as there is the regular harems, but they do exist. There's also Bishoujo, which is similar to Bishonen, but with women. I couldn't really find a really good example of that, and I'm not entirely sure. I've never really seen that term used too often, so I'm not sure if it's something that really comes up all that often. So I don't have a picture for that. Let's see. Oh, this is a fun one. Chunibyo. I think I pronounced that correctly. Which is technically, which translates as middle school second year disease. Basically, this is your middle school / junior high student with delusions of grandeur. They generally tend to think maybe they're adopted and their real parents are aliens or spies or something cool, or that they have some sort of hidden power, or that there's a world out there that only they can see. And it's kind of crazy. There's a few anime that feature these as the main character. Love, Chunibyo, and Other Strangeness? No, that's not right. Anyways, yeah, I can't remember the name of the anime offhand, sorry. But that's a really good one. There's a few others out there. And then a lot of times they'll be either parodies of these characters or they'll be a comic relief character in other animes. But you'll see that kick in sometimes. Then you've got Moe. Moe's a somewhat newer genre of really cute little girls, basically. Not little. Like, the girls in this, they look young, but they're actually in high school. And one of the definitions I found of that is cute that makes you want to hug and protect them. So it's a really common thing. So you get these really kind of real cutesy characters. So you'll see a lot of these shows, and usually these are slice of life shows where you're basically just following a group of characters going through their daily lives, and it's usually there's some comedy and it's kind of funny, and it's just, it's about the characters and their interactions. The picture here is from K-On!, which is about a group of what they call the Light Music Club, which is basically they play rock music of some sort, and they just are a club. Yeah, that was great. But Moe is a big one, and you get a lot of people will complain about it because they don't like that style, and a lot of people love that style, and there's a lot of arguments back and forth about it. But you'll get a lot of shows like that, and like I said, you get a lot of them are comedies, or they're, as I said, the little slice of life shows. Then we've got Tsundere. Tsundere is a term for a character that likes another character romantically, but angrily denies it. Generally speaking, so a lot of times they'll be angry. They'll put down the character that they like, or they'll call them stupid. One of the running jokes is, or the running phrases you'll see commonly is, I didn't make this for you. You can have it, but I didn't make it just for you, or something like that. Usually referring to like a school lunch. Tsundere is a very common archetype in anime. It's almost a requisite in a harem that one of the characters will be a tsundere. But sometimes they're great, sometimes they're really, really annoying. They can be really great when they come out of their shell. But it's all in the writing, and hit and miss. There's a lot of deris. Deri means love. Tsundere is Sun is I think hate or deny, something like that. That's somebody that denies that they love somebody. I'm not entirely sure the translation, but it's Tsundere. There's a lot of different of the deres, but the two main common ones are Tsundere and Yandere. And Yandere is basically someone who loves a character so much that they're willing to kill anyone and everyone for that character. And woe help that character if they cheat on her or him, because, well, they'll also kill them for cheating. It's not a dairy that I'm that familiar with because, as I said, I tend to avoid anime along those lines because they tend to be violent, they tend to be darker. And if you're wondering about the picture on here, this is a picture that gets referred to as Nice Boat. There's an anime out there called School Days, which got its final episode put off due to real-world instances. And so instead they just aired this video of this boat in its time slot. And so Nice Boat became kind of an internet meme. School Days is supposedly apparently it's a really fucked up anime, and I'm not sure if I could recommend it or not because I haven't watched it, but just be aware that it's the show. It's one of the couple shows that comes up really frequently if you talk Yandere. All right. So then we've got Yuri and Yaoi. Yuri is basically girl on girl. Yaoi is boy on boy. Both tend to be made for with an intended female audience. Obviously, that's not going to be the only audience for them, but they tend to be more like the Yuri stuff tends to be more romantic rather than, designed for porny, horny, guys. And Yaoi tends to be, again, you'll see it's got a lot of that, tends to have that Bishonen style, or the shoujo style, and that's obviously, like I said, guy on guy. I'm not real familiar with either of those. Not one of my particular interests, so I don't usually watch those animes. Then we've got Lolly. Lolly generally means Lolita. Sometimes referring to, and it's kind of a mishmash because sometimes it refers to young girl or characters that look young. Like, for instance, we got our character here who is actually a 900-year-old demigoddess. But it also sometimes refers to the gothic Lolita, because they'll have these, the gothic Lolita outfits. Another one of those archetypes that pops up really, really commonly in harem animes or any anime with multiple female characters. There's usually the one token lolly character who, like I said, usually looks younger but isn't. On occasion is, which gets a little weird and creepy, but, anime sometimes gets a little weird and creepy. As does any, mass media. And then we've got baka. Baka is a term you'll hear in an anime quite often. Usually one character calling another one baka. And baka just means stupid or idiot or something like that. It's usually not meant it's usually not meant too hard as an insult. It's usually somebody just, basically just yelling at another character. But you'll see that quite often. That's one of the first Japanese terms most new anime fans will end up becoming acquainted with. Then you've got otaku. And otaku is a weird term because it's a little loaded. Generally speaking, it refers to as someone who is a really hardcore anime fan, although over time, and it used to be very derogatory. kind of the way, calling somebody a nerd back in the 80s was derogatory, and brought, if you called somebody a nerd back in the 80s, it brought up, images of thick glasses and the pocket protector and the buttoned up shirt and all that. And, now nerd is just, a lot more of a loose term that just kind of means that somebody who's a fan of certain types of things or whatever, or somebody who's smart. Otaku's kind of the same way, for the most part. It still frequently tends to get used when they're referring to somebody who's really, really into anime, manga, and all that. You can see this dude here has got he's dressed up in Dragon Ball outfit, and he's got model kits on his shelf, and movies, and he's got the manga, he's got action figures and toys and statues and all that all over the place. And your stereotypical otaku, somebody who's just into anything relating to that sort of thing. So sometimes it'll get used in a very negative context. You'll have a character who is an otaku but is ashamed of it or doesn't like to say it. And then sometimes it just gets used and it's just, oh, whatever, okay, I'm an otaku, it's no big deal. So, kind of hit and miss in anime still, but... Alright, and my last couple, you've got... I got these backwards. I want to do this one first. Dojin. No, I want to do this one first. Manga. So I mentioned manga earlier, and manga is basically just Japanese comic books. To a degree. Japan does a lot of manga. They have numerous magazines that are produced weekly and monthly that have serialized stories. So each month you'll have, 15 or 20 pages in this giant, big, thick magazine that'll have a dozen or 2 dozen manga in it, different manga that's serialized. And then every so often, those are all collected up and they're sold in, I'm blanking on the term for what they call the manga volumes. But anyways, each volume of a manga, like you see on the shelves here, like I said, it collects up, a couple hundred pages usually, 100, 150, 200 pages of a manga, and then they sell them in individual volumes. And there's a lot of competition for the manga and the magazines. There's constantly holding fan votes and whatever, and constantly axing the low-ranking ones and bringing in new ones. And sales of the manga volumes is a big deal, and it's really huge business over there. And there's tons and tons of them. And that's where a lot of anime comes from. And then you've got what they call dojin. And you'll sometimes hear that term bandied about as well. The picture you see here is from Comiket or Comic Market, which is a twice a year held just gigantic freaking, basically a flea market for fan-created comic books. Japan has a weird, for us, anyways, for Americans, it's a little bit of a weird thing with copyright, where basically a lot of the manga and anime and video game or whatever companies have a don't ask, don't tell type policy, where they kind of turn a blind eye to fans producing their own comic books or other works as well, the statues and whatever else, to a certain degree. They kind of turn a blind eye to this stuff for fans to create it and sell it, usually at things like Comiket. And Comiket brings in like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people over a 2-3 day weekend. I mean, it is enormous. It blows Gen Con or even San Diego Comic-Con out of the water. And you can just see, I mean, and all it is just these little, basically people get space at the thing, and they get like a little table to sell their stuff. And if you're a bigger one, sometimes you can get better spots and better booth space, but for the most part, you just get these little ones. But the interesting thing is like I said, not only do the professionals kind of turn a blind eye to it, I mean, provided you're not, mass marketing it. But when you're just creating, a few hundred copies or 1,000 copies to sell it, this thing, they kind of, for a few bucks, they're kind of like whatever, because it helps. It's basically, they look at it as advertising, regardless of what it is. Now, there's some creators are more protective of their stuff, because a lot of doujin is not kid friendly, shall we say. They tend to go a little overboard with the hentai doujin, from what I've seen. But and some creators are a little more protective of their stuff, so they don't allow that sort of thing. But for the most part, they kind of let it go. And what's interesting is that even some of the professionals that are working in the manga industry will create doujins based on their own work or other people's works and sell it at the Comic-Con, because they just like to have fun. So it's a really interesting and weird little market there. And then I mentioned light novels, which were the, like I said, kind of young adult novels. And those, the manga and the light novels are, like I said, are where a lot of the anime comes from. But anyways, that's most of the terms that you'll hear me use, and basically what some of the stuff is. So if you're interested in watching anime or whatever, that's a basic primer, I guess. So hopefully this was informative. I rambled a little longer than I meant to, and I apologize for that. But if you like this video, please click like below. If you want to see more of my videos, click subscribe, all that fun stuff. You know the spiel. You hear it from everybody. Also, I have a Patreon going on, so if you're interested in being a patron, that helps me to be able to create more of these videos more often and do more of this fun sort of stuff. So if you're interested in that, there's a link below. Click it, check it out, please. Anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate it if you made it this far. Hopefully you liked the video. If you have any questions, or if I missed anything, or if I messed anything up, feel free to comment in the comments below. Thanks a lot, and enjoy.